In this house, I am invisible. To them, I am just the woman who cleans the floors and doesn't understand their language. But tonight, they realized that the silent maid has been listening to every secret they ever whispered. And now, I'm the only one who can get them out alive. If you believe the quiet ones are the most dangerous, like, comment and share, because silence is only power when you know when to break it. Elena scrubbed the wine stain off the marble floor, her head bowed. Above her, the billionaire and his business partners laughed, counting their stolen millions. They didn't lower their voices. Why would they? To them, Elena was part of the furniture. They thought she was a simple girl from a distant village who didn't understand a word of English. Suddenly, the heavy steel doors of the vault slammed shut. The lights turned red. A robotic voice announced, "Lockdown protocol activated." The billionaire panicked, punching codes into the wall. "It's not working. We're trapped." Who changed the master override? Elena stood up slowly. She wiped her soapy hands on her white apron and pulled a hidden earbud from her pocket. The men stared at her, confused. "You're using the 2018 encryption," Elena said. Her voice wasn't soft or shy anymore. It was cold, sharp, and her English was perfect, better than theirs. The room went deathly silent. "You speak?" the billionaire gasped, his face turning pale. "I don't just speak," Elena replied, walking toward the high-tech console. She typed a command that only the creator of the software would know. "I designed this security system 10 years ago when I was a ghost agent for the government. You bought it to keep people out. I'm using it to keep you in." She turned to face them, a predator's smile on her lips. "Now, shall we talk about what you did to my brother?" The sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian Vane's penthouse, but the light didn't make the room feel warm. To Elena, it felt like a cage made of glass and gold. She moved silently across the plush carpet, pushing a heavy vacuum cleaner. She kept her head down and her eyes fixed on the floor. In her plain gray uniform, she looked like a shadow that had forgotten to leave when the sun came up. In the center of the room, Julian Vane sat with 3 other men. They were surrounded by expensive cigars and glasses of amber liquid. They didn't stop talking when Elena approached to dust the mahogany table. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a tool like a toaster or a vacuum. "The shipment arrives at midnight," Vane said, leaning back in his leather chair. He tossed a folder onto the table, right next to Elena's hand. "The government thinks we're importing medical supplies, but the crates are actually filled with the new encryption chips. Once we sell these to the black market, we'll have enough to buy half of the city." One of the men laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "And what about the witnesses? The ones who helped us frame that kid, Leo?" "Leo is rotting in a cell," Vane sneered. "He's a ghost now. Nobody is looking for the truth anymore." Elena's hand trembled for a split second, but she quickly tightened her grip on the dusting cloth. Leo was her brother. Hearing his name felt like a knife to her heart, but she didn't let a single tear fall. She had spent 2 years playing this part. She had spent 700 days pretending she didn't understand a single word of English. "Hey girl!" Vane barked, snapping his fingers in Elena's face. "The glass is empty. Go get more ice. And try to move faster this time. Honestly, where do they find these people? It's like talking to a brick wall." Elena bowed her head deeply, making her face look blank and confused. She let out a small, quiet sound that suggested she didn't understand him. "Ice, Elena," Vane sighed, pointing at the bucket. "Cold. Water. Move." He turned back to his friends and chuckled. "See? Totally brainless. But she's cheap and she doesn't gossip because she doesn't know what we're saying." Elena turned away and walked toward the kitchen. Her heart was pounding, but not with fear. It was pounding with a cold, sharp hunger for justice. She had heard everything. She knew the time, the place, and the names. They thought she was a brick wall, but she was actually the foundation. And she was about to make their entire world come crashing down. The ice clinked softly as Elena filled the silver bucket in the kitchen. She could still hear the men laughing in the other room. They felt so safe behind their high walls and steel doors. Julian Vane always bragged that his mansion was the most secure building in the country. He called it the fortress. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. A deep, heavy thud shook the floor. It sounded like a battering ram hitting the reinforced front gates. Elena dropped the ice scoop. She didn't move toward the door, she moved toward the shadows. A second later, the high-tech alarm system began to wail. But the sound was wrong. Instead of the steady pulse of a security alert, the sirens let out a long, dying scream. The bright white lights in the hallway flickered and died. A heartbeat later, the emergency lights kicked in, bathing the entire penthouse in a blood-red glow. "What is happening?" Vane's voice screamed from the ballroom. "Computer! Status report! Lock down the elevator!" "Access denied," a cold, computerized voice replied. It wasn't the usual system voice. It had been hacked. Elena slipped to the kitchen doorway and peered into the ballroom. The scene was pure chaos. Vane and his business partners were scrambling toward the exits, but every door was sliding shut with a heavy mechanical click. The high-tech shutters slammed down over the windows, cutting off the view of the city. "We're trapped," one of the men yelled, throwing his body against the reinforced glass. "Vane, open the doors." "I can't," Vane shouted, his face turning as red as the emergency lights. "The system isn't responding to my codes." Through the thick glass of the main entrance, Elena saw shadows moving. Men in black tactical gear and gas masks were marching through the smoke. They weren't the police. They were mercenaries, and they moved with the precision of professional killers. They carried heavy rifles and electronic devices used to fry security circuits. Vane's perfect fortress had become a cage. He had spent millions to keep the world out, but now he had accidentally locked himself in with the wolves. The mercenaries began to burn through the main door's lock with a thermal torch. Sparking blue light sprayed across the room. Vane and his guests backed away, huddling together near the mahogany table like terrified children. Elena stayed in the dark kitchen, her breathing slow and even. She watched the red light dance on the walls. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like a maid. She felt like a hunter. The invaders thought they had hacked the system, but they didn't know the woman who had written the original code was standing 10 feet away. The thermal torch hissed as it bit through the last lock on the ballroom door. Sparks flew like angry fireflies. Julian Vane was shaking so hard he nearly knocked over his glass of expensive whiskey. He and his partners were backed into a corner, staring at the door as if it were a monster about to swallow them whole. "We're dead," Vane whimpered, his voice high and thin. "They're going to kill us for the codes, and then they're going to kill us for fun." "Be quiet, Julian," a voice said. The voice was low, steady, and perfectly clear. It didn't come from one of the men. It came from the kitchen doorway. Vane spun around, his eyes bulging. Elena stepped out of the shadows. She wasn't slouching anymore. She stood tall, her shoulders back, and her gaze was as sharp as a diamond. She pulled the white maid's cap from her head and tossed it onto the floor. "You spoke," Vane gasped. "And you sound different." "I sound like someone who knows how to survive," Elena said. She walked toward the main security console. She didn't look at the men, she looked at the blinking red lights on the screen. "Your system didn't fail, Julian. It was invited to sleep. These men are using a localized pulse to trick the locks. In 10 seconds, that door will open, and they will shoot anything that moves." "How do you know that?" one of the partners yelled. "You're a maid. Get us out of here." Elena's fingers flew across the keypad. "I'm the maid who built the foundation of this software. Now, if you want to live, you will do exactly what I say. Get under the mahogany table. Now." "Why should we trust you?" Vane barked, his pride still fighting his fear. Elena turned her head. The look in her eyes stopped his breath. "Because I'm the only one in this room who isn't afraid of the dark. Now move. The men scrambled under the heavy table just as the main door exploded inward. Smoke filled the room. The mercenaries stepped through the haze, their laser sights cutting through the red light. Elena didn't hide. She slid behind a marble pillar and pulled a small device from her pocket, a tool she had hidden inside her vacuum cleaner months ago. "The system is mine again," she whispered. With a single tap, she triggered the fire suppression system. A thick, white cloud of gas burst from the ceiling, blinding the invaders. In the confusion, Elena moved like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the carpet. The billionaires watched from under the table, their mouths open in shock. They realized they hadn't been living with a servant. They had been living with a guardian. The white gas from the ceiling filled the ballroom, making it impossible for the mercenaries to see. Elena didn't stay to watch them struggle. She pressed a hidden panel behind a large painting, and a narrow door slid open. This was a service tunnel, the secret veins of the mansion. While the billionaires used the grand hallways, Elena had spent 2 years learning these dark, cramped passages. She moved quickly and silently. She wasn't just running, she was preparing. In a small supply closet inside the walls, she grabbed a bottle of industrial floor wax and a bundle of thin, strong fishing line she had hidden weeks ago. "They think they are the hunters," Elena whispered to herself. "But they don't know the house." She reached a ventilation grate that looked down into the main hallway. Below her, 3 mercenaries were moving toward the server room. They were heavy and loud, their boots thudding on the marble. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small electronic part she had taken from a broken microwave. She attached it to a pressurized can of glass cleaner. With the skill of a master builder, she tied the fishing line across the dark hallway at ankle height. She coated the floor behind the line with a thick layer of wax, making it as slippery as ice. Finally, she rigged the cleaning can to the door frame. A few minutes later, the first mercenary tripped over the line. As he stumbled, his heavy vest hit the rigged can. A cloud of stinging chemicals sprayed directly into his mask, blinding him. He stepped back, hit the waxed floor, and went sliding into the wall with a loud crash. His 2 partners panicked, firing their weapons into the dark, but there was nobody there to hit. Elena was already 10 feet above them, moving through the ceiling crawl space. She felt the vibrations of their gunfire through the metal, but she didn't flinch. She knew every wire and pipe in this building. To the mercenaries, the mansion was a maze. To Elena, it was a weapon. She reached the main power box for the south wing. Using a simple metal screwdriver, she bypassed the safety lock. She didn't turn the lights back on. Instead, she made the lights pulse in a specific rhythm, a strobe effect that would make the invaders feel dizzy and sick. From the shadows of the vents, she watched the mercenaries stumble. They were elite soldiers, but they were fighting a ghost. Elena wasn't just cleaning up their mess anymore, she was clearing them out. The air in the server room was cold and humming with the sound of 100 spinning fans. Elena slid out of a ceiling vent and dropped lightly to the floor. The room was bathed in an eerie blue glow from the rows of blinking computer towers. This was the brain of the mansion, and it was the only thing the mercenaries really wanted. A tall man in a dark tactical vest stood at the main console. He was the leader. He was tapping frantically at the keys, his face twisted in frustration. When he heard Elena's boots hit the floor, he spun around, leveling his pistol at her chest. "Stop right there," he barked. He looked at her gray uniform and laughed. "The maid? How did a servant get past my men?" Elena didn't move. She stood in the center of the blue light, her expression as calm as a frozen lake. "Your men are currently sliding across the floor in the south wing. And you are wasting your time, Commander. You will never crack that encryption." The leader sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. "We have the best hackers in the world. This system is the most advanced in the country. It's only a matter of time before we own every secret in this vault." "I know it's advanced," Elena said, taking a slow step forward. "I know because I am the one who wrote the code. I didn't just build the walls to keep people out. I built a hidden door so I could always get back in. The man's eyes widened. You're lying. The architect of this system disappeared years ago. I didn't disappear, Elena replied. I just started cleaning up after people like you. She reached out and pressed a sequence of keys that the leader hadn't even noticed. She didn't type a password. She played a pattern of notes on the keyboard like it was a piano. Suddenly, the screens turned from red to a brilliant, steady green. The access denied warnings vanished. A secret folder appeared on the center screen, labeled with a gold seal. The backdoor code isn't a number, Elena whispered. It's a heartbeat. And it only responds to me. The leader lunged for the console, but Elena was faster. She tapped a final command, and the keyboard locked. A high-pitched alarm began to chirp. You think you're in control because you have a gun, Elena said, her voice echoing in the cold room. But in this digital world, I am the queen. And I just revoked your crown. The lead mercenary lunged forward, but Elena didn't stay to fight. She dove back into the service tunnel, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind her. The sound of his angry shouts faded as she climbed higher into the heart of the mansion. Her mission was only half finished. She had the codes, but she needed the truth. She moved through the narrow crawlspace until she reached a hidden compartment behind Julian Vane's private office. In the dark, she used a small laser pen to cut through a hidden floorboard. This was Vane's black hole, the place where he kept the things that were too dangerous to store on a computer. Her fingers brushed against a cold, metal box. She pulled it out and clicked it open. Inside, nestled among stacks of cash and fake passports, was a small, silver flash drive and a handwritten ledger. Elena's breath hitched. She flipped through the pages of the ledger. There it was, the proof. In his own messy handwriting, Vane had recorded the payments he made to the police to frame her brother, Leo. The flash drive contained the original video from the night of the crime. It showed Vane's own men committing the robbery, while Leo was miles away, working his late-shift job. I found it, Leo, she whispered. The paper felt heavy in her hands. For 2 years, her brother had been a ghost, locked away in a gray cell for a crime he didn't commit. For 2 years, she had scrubbed the floors of the man who had stolen his life. Suddenly, the wall beside her exploded. Wood and plaster sprayed into the air. The lead mercenary had found the hidden passage. He reached through the hole, his gloved hand grabbing for Elena's throat. Give me the drive, he roared. Elena didn't panic. She tucked the ledger and the drive into her tactical belt. She grabbed a heavy brass lamp from a nearby shelf and swung it with all her strength. It hit the man's arm with a loud crack. He let out a howl of pain and pulled back. Elena didn't wait for him to recover. She knew that Vane would do anything to keep this evidence secret. He would burn the whole house down just to hide his lies. But Elena wasn't a maid anymore, and she wasn't just a spy. She was a sister on a mission. She kicked open the office door and ran toward the balcony. The red emergency lights were still flashing, casting long, bloody shadows across the room. She had the evidence. Now, she just had to survive long enough to show it to the world. Elena burst back into the ballroom, her boots skidding on the marble. Julian Vane was no longer under the table. He was standing by the secondary control panel, his face twisted with a desperate, shaky smile. When he saw Elena holding the metal box, his eyes turned cold. Give me that drive, Elena. Vane shouted. He pulled a small remote from his pocket. I just signaled the mercenaries. I told them I'd give them the encryption codes if they take you out. I don't care about the secrets anymore. I just want you dead. Elena stopped. She didn't look afraid. She looked disappointed. You would burn your own home to save your skin, Julian. You really are as small as I thought. I'm the master of this house. Vane screamed, his finger hovering over a button. And you're just the help. You aren't the master, Elena said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. You're just a guest in a system that doesn't like you. She tapped her tablet, and the ballroom changed instantly. The large glass walls didn't just darken, they turned into giant, high-definition mirrors. Everywhere Vane looked, he saw his own terrified face. Then, the smart home speakers began to play a sound. It wasn't music. It was the recording Elena had just found, the sound of Vane's own voice planning the crime against her brother. "Turn it off!" Vane yelled, spinning around. He saw a dozen versions of himself in the mirrors. He saw the silent maid standing behind him, but when he turned to grab her, she was gone. The lights began to flicker. In the strobe light, Elena seemed to appear and disappear. She used the mansion's holographic projectors to create shadows that moved across the walls. To Vane, it looked like 100 Elenas were closing in on him. "The mirrors show the truth, Julian," Elena's voice echoed from every speaker at once. "You're trapped in a house built on lies. And the walls are finally talking." Vane tripped over his own feet, falling onto the hard floor. He scrambled backward, but every direction he turned, he saw the evidence of his crimes flashing on the walls. He was no longer a powerful billionaire. He was a man drowning in a sea of his own reflections. "Stop it! I'll give you anything," he sobbed, covering his ears. "I don't want your money," Elena said, stepping out from behind a pillar. She looked down at him as he huddled on the floor. "I want my brother's life back. And since you're so fond of locks, I think it's time you learned what it feels like to be behind one." The sound of heavy boots thundered down the hallway. The mercenaries were no longer searching, they were hunting. Elena ducked into the grand library, a massive room filled with thousands of books and a towering glass ceiling. She could hear the commander's voice through the door. "She's in there. Seal the exits. No more games." Elena ran to the center of the room. The library was a dead end. The only door was being blocked by 4 armed men, and the windows were reinforced steel. The mercenaries stepped into the room, their laser sights dancing across the leather book covers. "End of the road, ghost," the commander sneered, stepping forward. He held his bruised arm, his face twisted in rage. "You're trapped in your own fortress. There are no service tunnels here. No hidden doors. Just you and a lot of paper." Elena backed away until her heels touched the edge of the central display case. She didn't look scared. She looked at her watch. "You're right," Elena said, her voice calm and steady. "There are no hidden doors in this room. But I didn't just design the software, Commander. I studied the blueprints of the entire building. This library was built over the main cooling pipes for the server room." "So what?" the commander barked, raising his weapon. "You going to bore us to death with architecture?" "No," Elena said, her finger hovering over a small remote. "I'm going to use the pressure. I triggered the emergency coolant release 10 seconds ago. The pipes are currently overpressurized. And the weakest point in the entire floor is right here." She pressed the button. A deafening crack echoed through the room. The marble floor beneath the display case exploded upward as a massive jet of white steam and freezing water burst through the stone. The force of the blast knocked the mercenaries off their feet. The room filled with a thick, freezing mist in seconds. The mercenaries fired blindly into the steam, but Elena was already gone. She didn't run for the door. She used the force of the rising steam to lift a heavy wooden ladder against the wall. She climbed it like a shadow, reaching the high ventilation shaft that led to the roof. By the time the commander stopped coughing and cleared his eyes, the library was a lake of freezing water and broken stone. He looked up and saw only the empty vent. Elena was out. She was on the roof, the cold night air hitting her face. Below her, the sirens of the police were finally getting closer. She had the drive, she had the ledger, and she had the high ground. The cold wind on the roof whipped Elena's hair across her face. Below, the city of Seoul was a sea of twinkling lights, but all she could see were the blue and red flashes of police cars racing toward the mansion. The fortress was surrounded. Elena pulled her tablet from her belt. Her fingers moved with lightning speed. She wasn't just sending the data to a cloud drive, she was broadcasting it. With one final tap, she sent a massive file to every major news station, every newspaper, and every legal office in the country. "Go," she whispered. On the screens of millions of phones across the city, the truth began to appear. People saw the video of the robbery. They read the ledger with Vane's own signature. They heard his voice admitting to framing an innocent man. The wall of lies that had protected Julian Vane for years vanished in an instant. Inside the mansion, the front doors were kicked open, not by mercenaries, but by the authorities. Elena watched from the rooftop edge as the police marched into the ballroom. They found the mercenaries disarmed and dazed. They found the master of the house, curled in a ball on the floor, still surrounded by his own terrifying reflections. "Julian Vane, you are under arrest," a loud voice boomed from below. Elena watched as Vane was led out in handcuffs. He looked small and broken. He looked up at the roof for a brief second, searching for the silent maid who had destroyed him. But Elena was already moving. She slipped down the fire escape and landed softly in the dark alleyway behind the mansion. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her gray maid's apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on top of a trash bin. She didn't need it anymore. A black car pulled up to the end of the alley. Han Du-jin, who had been waiting in the shadows to help his ally, nodded to her. "It's done," Elena said, her voice steady. "The world knows the truth. My brother is coming home." The police sirens were fading into the distance as the car sped away. To the news, it was the shocking fall of a billionaire. To the police, it was a mysterious hack. But to Elena, it was the end of a long, silent war. She had entered the house as a ghost, and she was leaving it as a hero. The silent maid had spoken, and the world would never be the same. The heavy iron gates of the state prison groaned as they opened. Elena walked down the long, gray hallway, her footsteps echoing against the concrete. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform or a tactical suit. She wore a simple jacket and jeans, looking like anyone else on the street. But inside, for the first time in 2 years, she felt light. She sat behind the thick glass partition in the visiting room. A moment later, a young man with tired eyes and a faded orange jumpsuit sat down across from her. It was Leo. He looked older than he should, the weight of a false crime dragging at his shoulders. "Elena," he whispered into the phone. "What are you doing here? I told you to stay away. It's not safe for you to be seen with me." Elena pressed her hand against the glass. A bright, tearful smile broke across her face. "Leo, look at the TV in the corner." Leo turned his head. On the news, a reporter was standing in front of the Vane mansion. The headline across the screen read, "Billionaire arrested, innocent man framed." Leo's jaw dropped. He turned back to his sister, his eyes wide with shock. How did this happen?" "The truth finally came out," Elena said, her voice soft but proud. "The evidence was found. The judge signed the release papers an hour ago. You're coming home, Leo. By tonight, you'll be a free man." Leo began to cry, his forehead leaning against the glass. "I don't understand. Who found it? Who did this?" "A friend," Elena whispered. "Someone who was tired of the silence." She stayed with him until the guards came to lead him toward the processing center. She didn't tell him about the service tunnels, the backdoor codes, or the night she turned a mansion into a trap. She didn't want him to know the danger she had faced. She only wanted him to know the freedom. When Elena walked out of the prison, she didn't head back to the city. She drove to a quiet park overlooking the harbor. She took her old work ID, the one that called her a junior cleaning staff, and tossed it into a trash bin. The Vane Empire was in ruins. The mansion was empty, cleaned of its secrets and its master. Elena had finished her work. She had been a ghost, a maid, and a spy. Now, she just wanted to be a sister. She climbed into her car and started the engine. She had a new name, a new destination, and a brother to meet at the finish line. As she drove toward the horizon, the silent maid vanished for good, leaving nothing behind but the echoes of a justice long overdue.